So the broadcast for this whole week is being sponsored by Shmuel Lerman and family. It should be a schus for Akiva Balter, who without him we wouldn't be learning now, and many people wouldn't have access. It's amazing what he did for us. He has such a schus Torah on his hands that we all should be envious of. His name is Akiva Yeshua Nosson Akiva ben Tzipora Rochel Halevi. You should have a refuah shalema.
There's two Akivas in there.
It's Yeshua Nosson Akiva ben Tzipora Rochel. We're used to hearing Yeshua Nosson Akiva ben Nosson Gershon. No, not ben Nosson Gershon, because that's how he's called up to the Aliyah. But his mother's name is Tzipora Rochel. So Yeshua Nosson Akiva ben Tzipora Rochel should have a refuah shalema. The Karev Mamish, or Mamish, he always thinking with Mamish.
He started this before the pandemic.
That's right. He started this right before. So he brought in the refuah before the makir. Okay, so let's get started. Zok Tehillah Mishnah. Basar Kachi Kachim Shenitma. If Basar Kachi Kachim became tamei. For instance, a korban chatas, the meat of a korban chatas became tamei, or of an oila became tamei. Bein ba'avatuma, whether or not they became tamei with an avatuma. So, for instance, touched a piece of nevela, or a zov touched it. Bein b'vladatuma, or if it became tamei with a vladatuma. The Taklin gives an example, and it's important to be accurate with the example. It touched mashkim that were tamei derabbanan. So the Taklin is explaining the vladatuma as not only that it became tamei from something other than the av, but also that it's a tumah derabbanan, and that'll become very relevant in the Gemara. Bein bifnim, bein b'chutz. It doesn't matter where this meat is currently located, whether it's located in the Azara or whether it's wrongfully located out of the Azara. Regardless, the Shammai Omrim Hakol Yisarif Bifnim. The korban, even if it's outside and it's tamei, you need to bring it back inside the Azara to burn it in the designated place where korbanos that are possible are burned in the Azara. The only exception to this rule, which we burn outside of the Azara, is chutz mishenitna ba'afa tuma b'chutz. If it became tamei with an avatuma deraisa, and it happens to be outside, don't bring it back in to burn it. Leave it outside. Don't bring the tamei back in. If it became tamei inside, don't take it out. But if it became tamei outside the Azara, don't bring it back into the Azara for the sake of burning. That's what the Shammai sheet is. The Silaimer, Hakoil Yisarif B'chutz. You burn any korban that became tamei, whether it's avatuma, whether it's vladatuma, whether it's deraisa, whether it's derabbanan. For now, the Gemara is going to clarify. Everything should be left outside the Azara or taken out of the Azara. You don't want tumah in the Azara. The only exception to that is chutz mishenitma b'vladatuma b'fnim, unless it's only tamei midrabanan or only with a vladatuma, and it's inside already. Don't take it out. So Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are at two opposite ends of the spectrum. Beis Shammai holds, for the most part, the default is you burn the possible tamei korban inside the Azara, and Beis Hillel holds the default is you burn the possible tamei korban out of the Azara. Now we have two more shittas that are somewhat in the middle. Rabbi Elazar says, "Shenitma ba'avatuma." If it became tamei with an avatuma and a deraisa, so then bein b'fnim, bein b'chutz yisarif b'chutz. Then no matter where it is, if it's inside, take it out. If it's outside, surely don't bring it back in. Something that's tamei with avatuma should not be in the Azara, but shenitma b'vladatuma, if it's only a tumah d'rabbanan, then bein b'chutz, bein b'fnim, yisarif b'fnim, that you could burn inside, and even if it's outside, burn it inside, because there's a pasuk that indicates that it has to be that sulit muntosh should be burnt inside. So therefore, if there's no problem of tumah, it's only d'rabbanan, then burn it b'fnim. Wherever it became tamei, no matter if it's an avatuma or a vladatuma or the rice of the rabbanon, always burn it where it becomes tamei. Don't transfer it. Zok Tehillah Gemara. Bar Kapar Omar, he translates the avatuma in our Mishnah as avatuma is devar Torah, and the vladatuma is midivrayim. Like I touched when I read it, because that's going to be the shot that stands after scrutiny. So the avatuma means it was avatuma and there was a tuma deraisa. And a lot of tuma means it was only a tuma midrabanan. But Rabbi Yochanan Amar bein zeh dvar Torah. When it says in the Mishnah avatuma, it means deraisa. But when it says in the Mishnah velada tuma, it also means deraisa. It's a lower degree, but it's a deraisa dikatuma. For the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan's understanding of the Mishnah simply does not make sense. Because of Rabbi Yochanan, Alda Beishamai. Rabbi Yochanan, his shot won't fit with Beishamai. We'll see in a moment it doesn't fit with Beis either, but we'll do one at a time. It doesn't fit with Beishamai. The Beishamai said, Hakoil Yisaref Bifnim. All Tumas you burn inside the Azar. The only exception is Chutz Mishanitna, the Avatuma B'chutz. Only if it became Tumah with the Avatuma and it was already outside the Azar. So I ask you, Frek the Gemara, Ma bein Avatuma B'chutz, Ma bein Vlada Hatuma B'chutz. What's the difference if it's an Avatuma that you have to burn it outside, or if it's a Vladatuma that you have to burn it outside? It's Deraisa anyway. Zeh v'zeh, loy dvar Torah. Either way, it's a Tumah Deraisa. If there's an objection to allow a Tumah Deraisa, to bring a Tumah Deraisa into the Azara, what's the difference if it's an Avatuma or if it's a Vladatuma? Either way, a Deraisa Dikatuma should be prohibited from being brought into the Azara. So it's difficult to understand why Beis Shammai would make a distinction between two Tumas Deraisa, one you're allowed to bring into the Azara and one not. And according to Beis, you think it's any better? It's going to be a problem to understand Rabbi Yochanan's approach, even according to Beis. Why? The Beis Amar Hakol Yisar B'chutz. The default is all karbonis that are tamei are burnt outside the Azara. Chutz mashanitme b'velada tumah b'fnim. Unless it became tamei in the Azara, and it only became tamei from a velada tumah. Once again, the deraisa. Now I'll ask the same question. Ma bein velada tumah b'fnim, ma bein avatuma b'fnim. Zeh v'zeh loy dvar Torah. They're both deraisa. You don't find anywhere that the Torah makes some distinction between something that became tamei by an avatuma versus something that became tamei with a vladatuma, that one should be allowed in the Azara and one not. All tumah is prohibited from bringing in the Azara. So Rabbi Yochanan's explanation of what avatuma means and what vladatuma means, and that they both mean deraisa, it just doesn't work out. So therefore, lahava barabanim. The Rabbanim said, you know what? We're ignoring Rabbi Yochanan's pshat. It's beyond our understanding, and we're not even going to attempt to understand the Mishnah with him. Let's focus at least on Bar Kapara, because Bar Kapara also has some bumps in the road. So at least try to get one pshat in the Mishnah. Let's try to understand it like Bar Kapara, which is really the theme of Shekalim. It's very difficult to understand all the different shots, and if we can get one shot that makes sense, we're going to have to compromise. Ella, the Bar Kapara, let's try Bar Kapara. The kasha of the Bar Kapara, al the Beis Shammai. The Bar Kapara shot will also be difficult with Beis Shammai. The Beis Shammai Oimrim, Hakol Yisaref, Bifnim, all carbonates that are tamei, you burn them inside the Azara. The exception is Chutz Mishanitna b'Avatuma b'chutz. So I'm asking you the same question. Ma bein Avatuma, bein b'chutz, bein b'fnim. The Avatuma, Beis Shammai agrees, Bar Kapara agrees, everybody agrees it's a deraisa. So what's the difference if it's already inside or if it's outside now? Zeh v'zeh lo dvar Torah. Regardless if there's an Isur deraisa to have Tuma, this same Tuma in the Azara, what's the difference if it became Tuma in the Azara or if it became Tuma out of the Azara? So we need to understand that. Zok the Gemara, the explanation will be, is begin the Rabbi Akiva Amar. Mokam Timosai, Sham Teisrei Fasai. Rabbi Akiva has a svara that Mokam Timosai, Sham Teisrei Fasai. So since we have that shita, Beis Shammai agrees in a certain perspective, in a certain way, he'll agree with Rabbi Akiva that since it became Tama in the Azara, will allow you to bring it into the Azara. And the Takman gives a little bit of explanation, and he says as follows: Begin the Rabbi Akiva. Oops, I knocked my camera over. Begin the Rabbi Akiva. The Rabbi Lazar Kushta. Rabbi Lazar really said good. Before Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, Rabbi Lazar was brought down, and he said it all depends on what type of tumah it is. The cover b'seifa bein b'fnim kikushan. Rabbi Lazar just look at the type of tumah it is. If it's a tumah deraisa, if it's a tumah ab, which is a deraisa, then you must burn it outside. If it's a tumah derabon, you burn it inside, which is really what our kash is. Let's be consistent. Rabbi Akiva svirle makam tamasai sham shreifasai. Rabbi Akiva has this shita that there's an Indian to burn something right where it became tamei. The taimei, the vlada tuma. Why by vlada tuma does Beis Shammai allow you to burn it in the Azara, even though it became Tameh out of the Azara. You're allowed to even bring it back in. Because that's really completely Tar Midaraisa. Because we're learning according to Barkapar, there's a lot of Tumah Derabanan Ayrikan. Welcome to Moses. So really, Beis Shammai Shita is a little bit of a hybrid. The reason why Beis Shammai says that even though it's Tameh Midaraisa, you're still allowed to burn it inside the Azara. You're still supposed to burn it inside the Azara, is because he does somewhat agree to Rabbi Akiva's principle that Makim Tumasei Shamtes Refosei. The only place where he departs from agreeing with Rabbi Akiva is if it was only a Tumah D'Rabbanan, even if it became Tameh outside of the Azara, he allows you to bring it back into the Azara. Now we need to analyze how Bar Kapara works out with Beis Hillel Shita. Would you not have a problem how to understand Beis Hillel according to Bar Kapara? The Beis Hillel Omer Akol Yisoref B'chutz. All karbonis that became Tameh you burn outside of the Azara. Unless it has two things going for it. A, it's only Tameh Midrabanan, and B, it became Tameh in the Azara, then you'll burn it in the Azara. So I ask you, Ma bein Vlada Tumah, bein b'fnim, bein b'chutz. Zeh v'zeh, loy midevrayim hu? If we're talking about a Vlada Tumah that's Drabanan, so what's the difference where it became Tameh? If Midarais it's not Tameh, so bring it into the Azara. Why should you make a distinction between whether or not it became Tameh in the Azara or whether it became Tameh out of the Azara? So tomorrow, begin the Rab Shimon Omar. Rab Shimon said, Rab Shimon has a very big chiddush. Let's see the Aleph. Rab Shimon says a chiddush in Hilchas Mitzvah. We know that a Mitzvah has to leave the Shalosh Machnos, which means he's not even allowed to be in the city of Yerushalayim, where when the Beis Hamikdash was built, Yerushalayim was called the Machane Yisrael. Now, that we know, it's deraisa, he can't come in. But what about food that the Mitzvah ate? So it's not the Mitzvah itself, it became Tameh because it came in contact with the Mitzvah. It's a Rishon. But Shimon knows even that food, we say, must not come in to any of the three Machnos. That's a Drabanan, that's a Chumrah. So Zok the Gemara, Beis Hillel holds of that type of Chumrah, that if it's out of the Machana, even though it's only Tameh Midrabanan, don't bring it back into the Azara. Leave it outside. If it's already in the Azara and it's only Tameh Midrabanan, we'll let you burn it there. So it's a similar concept, that if it's Tameh already, don't bring it in, even though there's no real issue direction to bring it in. Because the Torah only prohibits the Mitzvah itself from coming into the Machana, not something that became Tameh because it came in contact with the Mitzvah. Okay, now we're getting to the final stretch of the Masechta. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Evarei Hatamid, when they prepare the carbon, so they butcher everything at the north side of the Mizbeach, and then they prepare them to put on the Mizbeach. So what they do is, there's a set of Kaihanim that bring it and place them on the ramp, line up the Evarim on the actual ramp, so that the next batch of Kaihanim will actually take the meat from the ramp and put it on the fire on the Mizbeach. So Evarei Hatamid, Nitnin, Mechatzi, Kevesh, Ulamata. Where were they placed? They were placed on the lower half of the ramp, which would be the southern part of the ramp, because the lower half of the ramp, when you went up the ramp, you were going from south to north. So the southern part of the ramp is where the Evorim would be placed. B'mayriv, on the west side. So if you're going up the ramp, it would be at the bottom of the ramp on the left. Shal Musafin, if it was a day where there was a Musaf, like Shabbos or Rosh Chodesh, where do they put the pieces of those animals? So if you were walking up the ramp, they would be on the right side. So when you got onto the ramp, on your right side there would be the Evarim of the Musafin. On your left side there would be the Evarim of the Carbon Torah. So Rosh Chodeshim, Rosh Chodesh were regular Musaf, but they had a more prominent position. Nitnin al Karchev HaMizbeach. They would be put on the Karchev HaMizbeach milamalam. There's different pshatim in it, but we'll learn for now that it's on top of the Mizbeach in the one Amma path that goes from Keren to Keren. So we learned that they walked around inside the area because the Keren would obstruct a complete path to walk all the way around the outer perimeter. So that area, the outer perimeter, is where they placed the things of Rosh Chodesh. And we'll soon see why Rosh Chodesh was given prominence. And it's because people need to know that today's Rosh Chodesh sort of publicizes it. The Talmud not everyone sees the moon. So when they see the Evarim, when they do things that are more noticeable, and we'll see other noticeable things that they did, it was to notify everybody that it's Rosh Chodesh. Hashkalim v'abikurim. the mitzvah that our whole Masech is about, to gather Shekalim, and the mitzvah of bringing Bikurim, they only apply when the Beis HaMikdash was standing. Nowadays, even though on Erev Pesach we give a zecher l'machzas a shekel, we're surely not doing the real thing. Aval, meiser dagam, u'meiser behema, u'b'chayros, these three things, noyeg bein b'fnei abayis, bein shaloi b'fnei abayis, they're noyeg even nowadays. Hamakdish shkolim u'b'bikurim. What if you're not supposed to makdish shkolim u'b'bikurim? They don't apply nowadays. But what if someone did it anyway? He said, this is the shekel for the Beis HaMikdash, or this is my bikurim. Hareza kodesh. It takes on kedusha, and now you have a problem of how to deal with it. Reb Shimon Omer, ha'omer bikurim kodesh, einan kodesh. Reb Shimon says bikurim, if you made kodesh, would not be kodesh, which would indicate, at first glance, that if you tried making shkolim kodesh, your words don't accomplish anything, and the money remains chulun. Zok Gemara, Ezeu karkoit hamizbeach. What is this karkoit hamizbeach? Where the Mishnah tells us that's where the evorim of the Rosh Chodesh karbanos were placed. Zok Gemara, it's amma ben keren lekeren. It's that path of an amma that goes from keren to keren. And here the Gemara says something unusual. Makam hiluch ragle kahanim, the place where the kahanim walked. And that's not really where the kahanim walked, because they couldn't walk the perimeter in that area because the keren is blocked. So it means near, adjacent to the Makam Hiluch Ragla Kahanim. There are those who learn that you are allowed to place these evorim not only on the outer perimeter, but even in that pathway, even if it's partially obstructing the walking of the Kahanim. Musafai, Musfei Shabbos, and Musfei Rosh Chodesh Mikodim. We see that there's a distinction made with the karbanos of Rosh Chodesh. So the question is, what are you makriv first when you're makriv karbanos? You makriv the Musaf of Shabbos, or the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh? What's first? So at first glance, you would argue Tadir v'she'enei Tadir Kodim, it should be Shabbos. So let's see what the Gemara says. Rabbi Yirmiyah Savar, Meimer, let's say Musaf Shabbos and Musaf Rosh Chodesh Kodim. You should actually be makdir first the Musaf Rosh Chodesh. Chayled Rabbi Yirmiyah min hadam. His energy, his strength, his army is from here. In other words, this would be his reason, because we learn in the Brashas Shiroi Shel Shabbos. The Shirah Shel Rosh Chodesh. When they said the Shir of Shabbos and the Shir of Rosh Chodesh, Shirah Shel Rosh Chodesh Kodim. They actually say the Shir of Rosh Chodesh before the Shir of Shabbos. Rabbi Yosy, Shani Taman. We learned.
Yes, what's the Shir of Rosh Chodesh?
They said it. They sang a special Shir. The Levim, they sing Shira. So we know the Shir of Shabbos is Mishmum Shir Le'em HaShabbos. Yeah. But there was a special shir that they said on Rosh Chodesh. No, the Levim said there was a special shir. I don't think that was all. So let's see what it says. Shani Taman. We have something that says a little different. The reason why they apparently went out of order and they said the shir of Rosh Chodesh before Shabbos, even though you should say Tadir v'she'enei Tadir Kodim, is because they want to be mafarshim to everybody that's Rosh Chodesh. Not everybody might be familiar by saying things out of order. Whenever the chazan says something wrong, everybody jumps on him. That everybody notices. You can be chulami the whole time, but heaven help you, the bachar makes a mistake, everybody jumps. So that's the best way to get someone's attention, is to say something wrong. So by saying the shir Rosh Chodesh, that'll make sure everybody knows it's Rosh Chodesh. Okay. So let's see what it says over here. Is this the base or the gimel? This is the base. So things change around a little bit. So yeah, so the Gra takes this line and puts it a little later. So I'm going to skip this line for now, and I'm going to go back. So Bram Hocha. So why is it that Musvei Shabbos and Musvei Rosh Chodesh, Musvei Shabbos Kodim? So over here, therefore we say Musvei Shabbos and Musvei Rosh Chodesh. The Musvei Shabbos shall be Kodim. Al Shem Kol Atodim Mechaveri Kodim Eskaveri. So the story is, when it comes to the shear, which people notice, there you'll go out of the normal order and you'll say the shear of Rosh Chodesh first, because there's a very compelling reason for it. So people should know that it's Rosh Chodesh. But as far as the order of being Makar Karbonis, which is more routine, I guess that doesn't stick out as much, that you stick to the general rule of Tadir B'Shen Tadir Tadir Kodim. So in fact, we're going to soon see it's a little bit unusual, because you Makriv the Musaf of Shabbos first, yet you say the Shira of Rosh Chodesh first. And then you're Makriv the carbon of Rosh Chodesh second, and you say the Shira for Shabbos second, which the Gemara is going to ask in a minute, and it's a shtickle outside. Now we go back to this Ketzad because this is where it belongs. Ketzad Hayoisa. So how would he do it? Shoichet Musvei Shabbos. He would check the Musvei Shabbos, and the person would say Shchita doesn't mean Daf Shchita because the shear was not said during the Shchita; it was said during the Hakravas Emurim. But Shoichet Musvei Shabbos, the Omer Aleim Shirei Shorosh Chodesh. How does it work? I'm sorry, I didn't read right. Ketzad Hayoisa effective word. How could you possibly do this? You're saying you're shechting first, you're being macro first, the carbon of Shabbos, and you're gonna say the shir v'shchaydish with the carbon of Shabbos. Dr. Mar, yes, that's exactly what you do. Shoichet musvei Shabbos, v'omer lem shir v'shchaydish. So it's mamish moshe kapaya. While they're processing the Shabbos carbon, they're actually singing the v'shchaydish shir, and while they're processing the v'shchaydish carbon, they're actually singing the Shabbos shir. Okay, let's see the Gemara Biter. Gimel. Ketzad hu oisa. Oh, I'm sorry. Here he's just sticking in what was missing before. Zok the Gemara Biter. Shekalim u'vikorban. Zok the Gemara. Ha shekalim kachu. The shekalim would be kodesh. So the last line of the Mishnah was Reb Shimon said that bikurim kodesh einan kodesh. If someone tries to make bikurim nowadays, it won't work. So you could be medayik that ha shekalim kachu. That Reb Shimon would agree to the Tanakama of our Mishnah that if someone set aside shkalim for the Beis Hamikdash, they would be kodesh. However, we have another opinion as to what Reb Shimon said. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Mishum Reb Shimon said, "Bein elu ubein elu lekotri." Bikurim will not become kodesh nowadays, and if you try making shkalim kodesh, they won't either become kodesh nowadays. Tani we learned, ger bizman haseh tzarich lavi kinoi riva rivas kesef. When a ger becomes a ger, one of the things that he has to do in the process is bring a carbon. However, nowadays, if someone wants to become a ger, he cannot bring that carbon. But he has to set aside already money now so that when the Beis Hamikdash is built, it will be ready to be brought. However, that could cause a problem because now you have money of kachim around. That's a hot potato. Nobody wants to have that around. Rabbi Shimon bitla Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai b'pnei hakol. Rabbi Yochanan was mevatel this, that the goy set aside money for the carbon, because it could lead to huge problems. What is the takala here? Kadad Tani, like we learned, ein makdishin, you're not allowed to be makdish things nowadays to the Beis Hamikdash. V'lei marichin, v'lei machrimin, these are all different ways of giving to the Beis Hamikdash. We're going to skip the next things because Trumas and Maishas we do nowadays, is manatzeh. So we don't make hekdish or erech and echrem nowadays. But v'im hekdish erech or echrem. If you did do that wrongfully, let's look at the hay, or higbia. So the halacha is haksus teisarf. If it's a beged, you have to destroy it. Now you're not allowed to destroy hektish. So teisarf doesn't literally mean you throw it into a fire. It means you lock it up and you don't get near it and you let it just wither away. The animal you lock up and you don't feed it, so you can't actively damage it, but you can't. We have to destroy it because it's very dangerous to have around. And money has to be destroyed. The Takam tells us you can just grind it down and spread the ashes, spread the dust into the ocean. But if you put it into Yam HaMelech, it'll dissolve on its own. You don't have to grind it down. So what we're saying is we no longer have the gerim set aside karbanis because it could lead l'takala. What if you wrongfully made shkalim kodesh? So the Amar Rab Shimon bitla Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai mepnei takala. Since Rab Shimon said that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said that they were mevatel this idea that a ger sets aside money for his carbon because of the danger of having it around. I would argue that over vehikdish kacha, it would work because you see if the ger would have done it, it would have worked. We just told him not to do it. So if you were makish kol, it should work. Rabbi Yehuda answered Draya, we had him before. Boy kum Rabbi Yosy. He had a problem with Rabbi Yosy. I don't understand. Hacha at Amar. Over here you're saying. Here you're saying, kitchu. It becomes kodesh. V'hacha at Amar like kitchu. And here you're saying it's not kodesh. So by Revi'as Kesef of the ger, we said that it becomes kodesh. It's the color. By shkalim, we just said according to Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, according to Reb Shimon, he held that if you made Shekalim Kodesh, we just learned a second ago, it wouldn't work. So the question is, why is it that when the ger set aside money, it would work, yet when one sets aside money for Shekalim, according to Shimon, according to the Girsh of Shimon Yudah, it wouldn't work. So we're going to slide back into the graph because again things change around. Amalei Tamain Ein Mikdash v'Yaniach Achi Yibana Beis Hamikdash. The reason why we say that the Shekalim won't become Kodesh is because what are you going to do? If you're going to say it's Kodesh and you leave it, Shema Yibana Habayis Barishan. Imagine if the Beis Hamikdash is built on Rosh Chodesh Nisan and the Titrim Trumas Halishka Min HaChadasha Bizmana B'Echad B'Nisan. If the Beis Hamikdash is built right around Rosh Chodesh Nisan, then your Shekalim are going to be Teklin Atikin. You won't even be able to use your Shekalim that you set aside maybe years before because they'll be Teklin Atikin. They're not going to be from this year. So these Shekalim won't even be able to be used at all. So therefore we say they're not Kodesh at all. But when the guy sets aside money, even though he's not supposed to, the fact of the matter is that money will stay Kodesh forever. It will never expire, and it will be able to be used. So the reason why Reb Shimon holds, according to Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, that if you try being Makar B'Shekalim doesn't work, is because it won't be able to serve its purpose anyway. Because these will likely be Tiklin Atikin, they likely won't be able to be used at all anyway when the Beis Hamikdash is built for its intended purpose. However, if a ger set aside money for his carbon, he can hold that forever and it'll be valid. So my islach. So what is the halacha here? The Maisa, what's the halacha? The halacha is Reb Shimon, who says in our Mishnah that they don't become kodesh. And with that, I actually by mistake finished the Masechta. I just finished the Masechta. Okay, Mazel Tov.
Mazel Tov.
Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov. So we'll have to save the Hadron. We have to talk about Winbeck Machine, but let's get started right away on YUMA. We have time to Geshmak and Masechta now. We're going to feel like we're having a honeymoon now because this Gemara is so easy compared to Shekalim. Now the question is, why is YUMA here and not Rosh Hashanah, which is what Chaim Tzvi just asked. So the Rambam says the reason why YUMA comes now, I actually just read it in the Daftamah. The Rambam says that the reason why YUMA is first is because YUMA is a very big day. And that's why it's called YUMA. It's the day. It's the day that we have a kapara. So that's why it's pushed in before Rosh Hashanah. And I think Shrir Goyim says YUMA's now is because YUMA has Isurim of Shabbos that are most similar to Shabbos. So we want to keep close to Shabbos. You might ask, it's way too late. We already put in Pesachim and Shekalim and Eruvin. The Teretz is there's a battle. What should come first? So there were more compelling reasons why Pesachim should come, what Eruvin should come, and Pesachim and Shekalim. But now that it's a question of between YUMA and Shoshana, Sukkah, we put YUMA first because the Isser Malacha of YUMA is most similar to the Isser Malacha of Shabbos. So YUMA is split into several parts. The first part of YUMA discusses how we prepare the Kohen Gadol to do the special avodas that he does on Yom Kippur. There's a beautiful, beautiful 40-minute introductory video that Daf Chaim did on YUMA that familiarizes you with the areas of the Beis Hamikdash that will all become very relevant as we learn the Masechta. I listened. I watched part of it. I didn't finish it, but it was very compelling. So I do plan on going back to watch the rest of it because it was very, very interesting. Okay. Zok Tehelig Mishnah. Shivas Yomim Kodim Yom Kippurim. 7 days before Yom Kippur, Mafrishin Kohen Gadol Mi Beisei L'Lishkos Parhedrin. We separate the Kohen Gadol from his house to the Lishkos HaParhedrin. We separated him because we want him to remain tahor. Umaskin Eloi Kohen Achetachtav. We also create a backup coin for him just in case. Shema Yorubei Psul, which Rashi says he could carry or he could have some other psul. Therefore, we need to have a backup plan. We also have to prepare for him a second wife, a replacement wife. Shema Thomas Ishtoi, because if his wife dies, he becomes possible to do the avodah on Yom Kippur. Shneimar, it says the carbon that the Kohen Gadol brought to be mechaper for him and his family is v'chiber ba'adoyu ba'ad beisai. Beisai zu Ishtoi. So he has to be able to be mechaper for his wife. You need to have a wife in order to be able to be mechaper for her. Amulosha told him, in Cain, if you're going to be so paranoid, Ein lo davar soif. Well, then make a third wife and a second wife, maybe a third wife and a fourth wife. Maybe they'll die as well. So Tosfos discusses whether or not you're choshish lamisa or not. So Tosfos makes a distinction that even though long term you could be choshish lamisa, but short term to say that there should be so many people dying that you're not necessarily choshish for. The reason why here there's all these chashashes is because the avoid of Yom Kippur are serious. Mishum de chaparas yuskol yisrael kluya bazeh. So therefore you're extra choshish.
So would he do that? Would he get married right away, even if it's in the middle of Shiva, or does he still? Is he still?
Yeah, you would have to.
He's still.
I'm sorry. Oh, he married two wives. I don't know. I thought it means he would marry her. It's just I thought it means he would marry her if
after the other one dies.
If his wife would die. Oh, what is it? It says Maskin Shema Thomas. I don't know. I hear. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Why can't he do it on tonight? He can marry her on tonight. He can perform perhaps the Kedushin al Tanai that his wife dies.
Oh, what a way to marry somebody.
Try explaining that to your wife.
Feel great about that.
Okay, not awesome. I don't know. I got to look into that. I don't know. I never thought of that. I'll have to look into it. Yeah. It's not awesome. We learned there. Shivas Yamim Kodim Sreif Sapara. We have a similar situation of how they prepared the Kohen Gadol to prepare the Parah Aduma. Hayum Afrishan, Kohen, Hasarif Sapara Mibeisai, Lelishka Shal Pnei Abira. So find the Mizracha. They had a room that was outside of the Azara, but it was to the northeastern area of the. It was in the northeast direction of the biro, and we'll see what that is. And the name of it was Lishkas Beis HaEvan Hoshin Nekra. So this is not the same place where they put the Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippur. This was a separate place where they put the Kohen who was preparing the Parah Aduma. Why were they so careful to keep him tahar? Once again, we're going to see because there was a reason why they had to. The Gemara can explain. The Naman V'Laman Nikra Shema Lishkas Beis HaEvan. Why was it called? Actually, I skipped towards Lishkas Beis HaEvan on the cross. The name of this chamber was the Lishkas Beis HaEvan. V'Laman Nikra Shema Lishkas Beis HaEvan. Shekol Ma'aseh B'Chli Glolim B'Chli Avadim B'Chli Adama. Anything that was done in this lishka was done with things that are not makabel tumah. All these types of kelim made out of manure, made out of stone, made out of earth, they're not makabel tumah. So there's no chance of any tumah happening there at all. That's how careful we are. Why are we so crazy careful by preparation of parah aduma that the kohen should be so super tar? My time, even the tfil yoim kosher b'parah, since even a tfil yoim is kosher to do the avodah on the parah. That none we learned metamin hayu hakoyin asarf esapar umatbil noisai. They actually purposely made him tamei the day that he would deal with the parah aduma, and they would tovel him to prove that even though he didn't wait till the nighttime, he's still allowed to be oisik in the parah aduma, and they did it. Is lahoikim miliben shal sadukim shayu ayim b'meruube shema hashemesh hoisenasis. Since the Tzedukim would say that someone who's tamei needs hair of shemesh in order to be able to be oisik in the parah aduma, they wanted to show they wanted to demonstrate that that's wrong. So they dafka were with the kohen and made him go to the mikveh, and they had him do the avodah of the parah aduma that day to prove that they're wrong. But once you create a zilzal by actually announcing that you could be tamei or you could be a tful yoim, takinu la rabbanon kli glolim kli avodim kli adama. On the other hand, they went very, very machmir, the loy lekabel tumah that are not makabel tumah at all, so that people shouldn't become lax regarding their opinion and their attitudes towards the parah aduma. So therefore, even though they made one very public kula, they created a tremendous series of chumras so that it balances that out. Why did the kohen have to prepare himself for 7 days in an area that's to the northeast of the Beis HaMikdash? So Akiva the Chatasi, since the Torah refers to the parah aduma as a chatos, it's not really a carbon chatos, but the Torah calls it a carbon chatos. The chatos to netzofim, and we know where do you shech the chatos? At the north side of the Azara. So it makes sense that it should be at the north. It also says regarding the parah aduma, el noichach penei oil moed. Where do you burn it? You burn it opposite the oil moed, which would be east of the oil moed. So takina la rabbanan lishkas tzefayim mizracha, they had him prepare in the area of tzefayim mizracha, which is the perfect direction in which to prepare for the paraduma. Ke'echet lava lahakera. Once again, it'll be clear, ladas to know, shahufra sham kedei lahat lalov avoidus para hakriya katas atuna mizrach. V'yosem leiv, the kohen will be mesim leiv li'ayzorav b'maisev v'seid avoidus. The area where he is will constantly remind him of what he's doing here and how he has to be extremely careful to do this very, very properly. Zok to Gemara. My bira. Why was it called bira? What is this bira? There was an area on Har Bayis that's undefined exactly where it was, but it was called bira. The whole base of Mikdash was referred to by David HaMelech with the word bira. It says Habira Asher Achinaisi. David said to Shlomo that you're going to build a base of Mikdash in this area Asher Zimanti that I prepared Lamakim Bar and Aroinel of Noisabai. The David Karmelei like Krabadivayanim. So David referred to the Har Bayis as the bira. How do you know that you need Prisha for Yom Kippurim and for the Paraduma? Rashi says, Amar Bnei Bechalakya, Amar Bachase Baridi, Amar B'Yochanan, Amar Kra. We just learned last week Pasha Shmini, and it says there, Kasher Asa Bayoy Mazeh, Siva Hashem Lasois, L'Chaper Aleichem. By Shmini, they actually were perished from their wives, Rashi says, for 7 days. And then B'Yom HaShmini, they did their Avodah. So when they originally made the Mishkan, the first day, before they started doing Avodah, the Yom HaShmini, for 7 days, they needed Prisha. And it says, Kasher Asa B'Yom Hazeh, like they did by the original preparation of the Mishkan, Siva Hashem Lasos L'Chaper Aleichem, Hashem said that we should do again. When should we do it again? So the Lasos, Siva Hashem Lasos refers to Elu Masei Para. That's referring to the preparation of the Paraduma. And that's why by the Paraduma you have to isolate for 7 days. And L'Chaper Elu Masei Yom Kippurim. That's referring to Yom Kippurim. That's how we know that by the Paraduma as well as by Erev Yom Kippur, the Kohen has to isolate. B'Shlama, we can understand what isolation means. B'Shlama Kulei Kra B'Para Loi Mesukam. I understand why you wouldn't argue that the pasuk is only coming to tell us that by the Paraduma you have to isolate 7 days and not the Yom Kippur. Because L'Chaper, it says L'Chaper Upara La Bas Kapari. So for sure, the pasuk has to be referring to Yom Kippur, which has a kapara. It can't only be the Paraduma. Maybe the whole pasuk of Asher Shiva Hashem Lasos is referring only to Yom Kippur. How do you know that by the Paraduma, B'chalal, you need isolation? Amri, we have another limud that helps us. Yalev Tziva Tziva. We use the word Tziva as well. Tziv Hacha, Tziva Hashem Lasos, by the Yom HaShmini. Uksiv Hashem, by the Paraduma, Zois Chukas HaTorah, Asher Shiva Hashem Lemar. As the Torah is introducing the Parsha of Paraduma, the Torah says, this is the Chukas HaTorah, Asher Tziva Hashem Lemar. Ma'alon Parah, just like over there we're speaking about the Paraduma, Afkan Parah. Kan Prisha, just like by Yom HaShmini, they were a Prisha of 7 days, Afkalon Prisha. Back to Gemara, the Ema Tziva, the Yom Kippurim. Maybe the Tziva doesn't indicate that it's the Paraduma. Maybe the Tziva indicates that it's Yom Kippur. And once again, let's say that the pasuk of isolation is only teaching us halacha by Yom Kippur. The Ksiva Yaska Asher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe. So Gemara, the pasuk of Yaska Asher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe is after all of the mitzvahs were already explained. It says afterwards, after the fact, by Yaska Asher Tziva Hashem. Zok Gemara, Don Tziva the Lefnei Asiva, Mitziva the Lefnei Asiya, Mitziva the Lefnei Asiva. Asiya. We'll learn the Tziva that's talking about the Paraduma, which is in the introduction to the Parsha, from the Tziva by Yom HaShmini, which is also at the introduction to the Parsha. They done in Tziva the La'achar Asiya, Mitziva the Lefnei Asiya. But the Tziva by Yom Kippur is the Tziva that says after all of the halachos were said. In fact, Gemara be'emet Tziva de Karbanos. So maybe it's Tziva de Karbanos, meaning maybe it's all other Karbanos need a hafrasha. But who said you need this isolation by the Paraduma? As Bnei Yisrael. So once again, the Gemara says, daven tziva mitziva, vein daven tzivsai mitziva. The word isn't exact. When you want to compare, you need to use an exact word. In fact, Gemara, I'll show you a precedent that when you make a shtikol gzera shava, you don't need the exact wording. But when someone has a neg in his house, it's locked up for a week, and the kohen comes back to see if it's spread. If it's spread, then he has to take off the stones that it's spread to and clean it off. And then he waits another week and he comes back again, and the Torah says Uva Kohen over there. But the Torah doesn't say what the process. When the Kohen returns after the 7 days, after the second set of 7 days, the Torah doesn't describe the process. It says Uva Kohen. And we learn Zui Shiva Zui Bia. We learn that the same process that the Torah described when the Torah said B'Sheva Kohen also applies to the area where the Torah used the word Uva Kohen. He's coming back, he's going. It's not the same word, although it means the same thing. They're going back to the house, but it's not the same word, yet it was close enough for the Gemara to make that Zer Shava. So Gemara, you're right. If you cannot find an exact match, so you have to settle for not an exact match. Here we have exact tziva by paraduma. Why should I go to tzivsoi to regular kabbanis? So therefore, mididamilay afinon. We said earlier that the lechaper in the pasuk of Vayam Shmini is signaling to us that this should apply to Yom Kippur as well, that the kohen has to isolate. The ema kapara de karbonis. Maybe the kapara means the karban of all karbonis. Who said that only for Yom Kippur does the kohen have to lock himself up for 7 days? Maybe every kapara, every chatos that a kohen brings, maybe he would have to lock himself up. So tomorrow, how could you say that? Miya dinan high kohen misrami the boiler prisha. People are bringing carbon chatas all the time. You don't know when you come to work that day as a kohen if you're going to be being makar of carbon chatas. So tomorrow, what's the problem? As this part of the standard protocol, before you do avoida in the Beis Hamikdash, you should have to isolate for 7 days before you work in the Beis Hamikdash, so that just in case a chatos comes to you, you'll be for sure tar with this isolation. So maybe that's halacha. So tomorrow, done in davar shekavu aloizman, bidavar shekavu aloizman. The Yom Hashmini was definitely a kavu dikazman. So therefore, we'll teach it to Yom Kippur, which is also kavu aloizman. But the standard chatas that could come anytime, any place, or any time at least, we're not going to learn that from Yom Hashmini. We're going to only learn Yom Kippur, which is a kavod at a time. Lafuchi karbonis the chol yom isnu, they can come anytime. So maybe it's referring to the musafin that are brought of the Yom Tovim. They're also a kavul oizman. So tomorrow done in davar shenoy pamachas b'shana, davar hanoy pamachas b'shana. So the Yom Hashmini wasn't really pamachas b'shana; it was once in a lifetime. But you learn something that's a one-time event to Yom Kippur, which is at least only once a year. They come more frequently. So maybe pick one Yom Tov and only one of the Yom Tov, which only comes once a year. Do you have to isolate? Who said it's Yom Kippur? And if you're going to say you wouldn't be able to know which one it was because they all have equal reasons to argue that you should need isolation for them, we know whenever the Torah discusses the Yom Tovim, it always starts off with Chag HaMatzos. Or Chag HaSukkos, there's many mitzvahs by Sukkah. Rashi says you have Sukkah, you have Lulav, you have Arava, you have Nischamayim. So since you don't know which one, it would be undefined. It can't be that that's what the Lechaper is pointing to. And Adon in Prisha Shiva Liyoim Echad Mi Prisha Shiva Liyoim Echad. We learn the Prisha that they did by the Yom HaShmini, before the Yom HaShmini, was in preparation for that one special day. So too, the Prisha that we're going to learn from it is a Prisha that's only on behalf of one special day, which is Yom Kippur. All the other Yom Tovim have multiple days to them. So we're only talking about a Prisha that precedes a single special day. They done Prisha Shiva L'Shiva. Mi Prisha Shiva L'Yamechad. You cannot learn the Prisha of 7 days for a 7-day Yom Tov, such as Pesach or Sukkot, from the Prisha that of 7 days that was for 1 day for the Yom HaShmini. The Prisha Shiva L'Yom Echadu, the Ema Shmini, the Prisha Shiva L'Yom Echadu, maybe the Prisha you should do is for Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres is a 1 day independent Yom Tov, so maybe that's where you learn you need to have Prisha of 7 days before Shmini Atzeres. So tomorrow, done in davar shein kedusha lefanav, mi davar shein kedusha lefanav, and done in davar sheyesh kedusha lefanav, mi davar shein kedusha lefanav. If I have a choice of learning Yom Kippur from the Yom HaShmini or learning Shmini Atzeres from the Yom HaShmini, I'll learn Yom Kippur from the Yom HaShmini. Because Yom Kippur, there's no Yom Tovim before it, which is similar to the Yom HaShmini, which was regular Chayil the days before it. Mashek and Shmini Atzeres, which has the whole Yom Tov of Sukkot before it, that's not so similar to the case of the Yom HaShmini, and therefore it makes more sense to learn to Erev Yom Kippur that there has to be Prisha. Is it not a Kal V'chomer? Is it not a Kal V'chomer? Hashta, Dover she'en Kedusha lefanav by Prisha. If Yom HaShmini, there was no Kedusha before it, nevertheless, you still need Prisha 7 days. Dover she'en Kedusha lefanav like Kol Shekein. Surely Shmini Atzeres is more likely to require Prisha because it's a holier day, and the proof is in the pudding because even before it there's Kedusha. On that, Amar Reb Mashasha, Loi Hazeh Ksiv, doesn't it say Hazeh in the pasuk? Therefore, it's Kazeh. We want the limud is telling us, yeah, you might have a Kal V'chomer to argue that Shmini Atzeres has more Kedusha, but the limud has to be that it has to be exactly similar to this. The pasuk again that this all started from was it says Kasher Osa Bayoim Hazeh Tziva Shem Lasas Chaper Alechem. So Bayoim Hazeh only look for a day that's very similar to the Prisha of the Yom HaShmini that preceded the Yom HaShmini. So the most similar at the end of the day is not going to be Shmini Atzeres because it has Kedusha before it. The most similar would be Yom Kippur because the days preceding Yom Kippur are regular days of Chayil versus or similar to the Yom HaShmini, which the days preceding them were regular days of Chayil, versus Shmini Atzeres, where the days preceding them were not days of Chayil. Zok to Gemara, Rav Ashi Amar, Mi Ika Midi, the Ika Rega Loi Boy Prisha, Tafel the day Boy Prisha. It wouldn't make sense anyway to say that Shmini Atzeres needs Prisha, because it doesn't make sense to say that the main Yom Tov of Sukkot you don't need Prisha for it. But the Shmini Atzeres was just like the add-on. It's because the Kosher Loi Predaskim is just the add-on. That should need Prisha. That doesn't make sense. Okay, let's stop over here. We're right cut up. We're right on time, and we're right with the daf. So we'll stop here, and the Mishnah will pick up over here tomorrow. Once again, I want to mention that this week's broadcast has been sponsored by Shmuel Lerman to be a refuah shalema for our dear friend Akiva Baltar, who we wouldn't have any of our learning happening over here if it wasn't for him. He set it all up. So again, we're learning that it should be a schus for a Yeshua and a refuah for Yeshua Nosson Akiva ben Tzipora Rochel.
Amen.